the South Fork of Ash Creek goes through there, so it's.
Are you?
Well, welcome to PLC. I will turn the time over to Superintendent Kavitsky.
Good evening, and I'm gonna turn the I'm gonna turn the time over. So joining us this evening is David Williams from Piper Sandler. I almost went Piper Sandler. I almost said it backwards. David Williams from Piper Sandler. Many of you may remember him when we had some conversations about when we were talking about going out for bond. Prior to that, they helped us with some of that work. But he is back today because we wanted to share with the board just some educational pieces. Again, we talked a lot in the school district about bonds. We have not talked a lot about the levy process. So we had a conversation with leadership and felt it was a good idea to bring him in front of the board so you all could get the information, and then we can continue to have conversation based on our education today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David. I'm going to get our slide presentation going for the online people, and then we will get going here.
Yep, David Williams, Piper Sandler. Happy to be here. Thank you. I was texting Jen from the road being like, oh, I'm going to roll right in at 5. I might be late because there was a big accident on I-5, but I made it. So thankfully here. Hopefully no accident when I go home. And yes, before my stint now at Piper Sandler, I was a lobbyist extraordinaire. I spent 25-ish years representing public education in Oregon. I worked for the Oregon School Boards Association, Portland Public, Beaverton School District, and finished up my career with Northwest Regional ESD as chief of staff over there. So in addition to lobbying, a lot of strategic affairs, a strategic initiative work for those districts. Spent the COVID years at the Beaverton School District as chief of staff there. And helped draft and implement our Student Success Act work for Beaverton. So I'm very proud of that work. So been with Piper Sandler now about 3 years. And why are we here? What do we get out of this? So Piper Sandler, nothing at the moment. Well, there's maybe one small piece, but really nothing. We obviously have been bond underwriters for most school districts in the state, and we did help you all in preparation for your last bond election attempt. We help figure out all of the numbers on indebtedness and what that means. But in that work, we developed kind of a unique expertise on Oregon's property tax system, right? And so what we like to do is be able to help school districts understand where it's to your benefit, where the property tax system might help you. And that is in this thing called the local option levy, which is a relatively unique tool available to all jurisdictions, but unique to school districts. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the basics, what it is, how it functions, how it's wildly complex and will make your eyes glaze over and might make your brain hurt a little bit. So that's the bad news. The good news is you don't have to necessarily remember all of it. We're here for questions as you need them and can help you if you chose to go down this path. So local option levy, what is it and what are we talking about? And I apologize, I did not bring a printout of this. We will, Jen does have it. Happy to send it around later. So if you want to peruse it, if it needs be. So local option levy is an alternative for raising additional operating dollars for jurisdictions from Oregon's property tax system. Okay, it was created in '97, but via ballot measure 50. So many curses in ballot measure 50, if you will, many challenges with how we levy and assess properties in the state. One little bit in that creation, in that process was creating this local option levy authority. It's technically available for both operating funds and capital funds. You could do a 10-year capital levy. However, no school district has ever utilized it for capital levy purposes because it's hamstrung in a variety of ways. I'm not going to go into all that detail. Needless to say, the GO bond authority is a much more powerful authority for indebtedness, for capital indebtedness. Every district that's ever done this has done it for operating funds. You can levy it as a fixed dollar amount, like, oh, we want to levy $1 million, or you can levy it as a rate per thousand. Much like operation and capital, every district that's done this levies it for a rate per thousand. That will be obvious as we go through it. It's a way to make sure you're taking advantage of growth rather than hamstringing that collection. It's subject to voter approval at May or November elections. Technically, you could go out in March or September. Those are election dates that exist on the calendar. When was the last time you got a March or September ballot? Probably haven't, because the double majority requirement applies. If you don't remember that, that is a requirement that says you have to not only get 50% yes, but there has to be 50% turnout in the election itself. That does not apply at May or November elections.
Plus you have to pay for it.
And you have to pay for it. You have to pay for it anytime you're gonna go out for it, you gotta pay for it, but you share the cost when there are other things on the ballot. Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so what can you use a local option levy for? So, the capital side of, some days, yeah, oh, I pressed a button. The capital side of this, let's ignore that. You can use it for capital expenditures. Again, nobody ever does it. We generally don't advise it. Operations, a very brief bullet point, you can use it for anything you can spend money on. If the district can spend money on that thing, you can use local option dollars for that. They are unencumbered, unrestricted funds available for any purpose. That's the beauty of it, right? Okay, we do have to do a little bit of property tax history lesson here to really understand where this exists and how it functions. Okay, so let's roll back the clock to 1990, and that's where we got ballot measure 5, right? So you know, all through the 80s, the go-go 80s, right? Property values are exploding across the state. Growth is happening all over. Fantastic, wonderful. People are getting quote unquote taxed out of their homes because you have an old millage rate system and you're taxing on real market value property, and your property's going up 20% a year. You're suddenly paying 20% more taxes, but you didn't get more money for that, right? So that's the idea. So along comes this idea of measure 5, and they said, well, you know what? Let's suppress that a little bit, and let's just cap the amount of property taxes that can be levied on any properties in the state, okay? And we created a bifurcated levy system. So it said you can levy no more than $5 per 1,000 of real market value, key data point, for all education districts, and then $10 for all local government. So you have these two spots on the ledger, and if you bring up your property tax bill, you'd even notice there's an education with all the little education stuff under it, local government with all the other local governments, city, county, fire district, etc. All of them are going to be under that. Education is only 3 entities, only 3 entities in the state: school district, community college, and the ESD. Well, the elephant in that room is the school district, right? School districts, by and large, are running at 80% of that capacity is in the school district, right? The ESD and the community college are small levy rates because they're large jurisdictions, right? So measure 5 said, great, we're going to cap it $5 per 1,000. We're just going to deal with the 5. We're not dealing with local government. $5 per 1,000 of real market value. So whatever that math works out to be from a total dollars on each individual property, that's the maximum that that property would have to pay in property taxes for education. Great. Well, the 90s still happened, and property values continued to explode in the 90s, right? So then along comes actually measure 47, which was so messed up that we had to rewrite it and put it back on the ballot in the form of measure 50. Okay, so measure 50 said, great, we've got this cap on property taxes, but you know what? We're really not dealing with a fundamental problem here, and that is that value growth for the homeowner who bought that house in 1981. Value growth doesn't mean anything for that homeowner. It doesn't translate to an ability to pay a rate-based property tax system that continues to grow, right? So it said, right, we're going to leave those rates in place, but what we're going to do is we're going to create a new construct for property value called assessed value, okay? So what we're going to do in 97 is we're going to roll back property values by 10% in 1997. So whatever that property was worth then, minus 10%. and then grow it at a maximum of 3% a year forever. Right? So this is where I'm happy to admit, well, maybe not always happy to admit. I grew up in a state south of here. And in that state, they have reset at sale. So they have a similar assessed value framework, but when you sell a property, the new assessed value is the sale value of the house. Not the case in Oregon. Property values grow at 3% a year forever, regardless of transfer of sale or transfer of ownership, et cetera. That's the maximum they can grow. They can grow at less than 3% in recessionary years. So think 2008 housing crisis, but they can never grow more than 3% a year. So you have assessed value now capped at this growth rate. That obviously translates to the taxes I'm paying as a homeowner, which are now this rate-based system, because the other thing Measure 50 did was it locked in, instead of the levied dollar amount, it locked in permanent rates for every jurisdiction in the state. So the school district has a permanent rate, property tax rate that is levied, that under the Measure 5 framework would have been levied against real market value. Measure 50 said, no, we're going to take that rate. We'll see it here in a little bit. Let's call it 480 or something like that. I don't remember off the top of my head. Instead of $4.80 per real market value, for 1,000 of real market value, Measure 50 says, no, take that and just put it on assessed value. So 480 times 1,000 times assessed value divided by 1,000. You get the point here, right? So that amount now, that rate is only, the amount it's collecting is only going to grow at a maximum of 3% a year, right? So you have this fairly reliable growth plate going forward on property tax collections. For the homeowner, that creates just a, fairly understandable slope. When they're buying a piece of property, they know what's happening, they know what they're going to pay over time. However, what happens, of course, is as property values grow by more than 3%, the levy-based system now is unable to capture that added property value to the jurisdiction. And because we don't reset at sale, it is never able to add that value. One quirk we don't put out on here, this includes new construction. So new construction, when a brand new house is built on an empty lot, and that house comes on the rolls, the assessor goes and they looks at that house and he says, okay, what's the market value of that property? And then what's the average ratio between real market value and assessed value in the whole jurisdiction? County, they do it by counties, in the whole county. That rate, let's say it's 60%. I'm going to apply that rate to that brand new property. So that brand new property will only come up, their assessed value is 60% of the real market value from day one. So you're not even able to take advantage of the kind of value proposition that's happening, even in a high growth, high development environment, right? So that's the challenge that system created. However, knowing that as that time moves forward and real property value grows faster than this 3% assessed value framework, we're creating a gap, right? We're creating space between those two lines. And more importantly, we're creating space between what, say, that $5, go back to our $5 per thousand. We're creating space between what that $5 per thousand is collecting on the assessed value versus what it could collect on the real market value. That gap, therein lives the local option levy. Okay, so local option levy authority says you could go in and you can levy an additional tax that collects in that space between what $5 is collecting and what $5 would collect, right? You can levy this additional tax in there. There are some limits in here, and we're going to get into some detail on this to help understand that a little more, okay? Subject to voter approval. Okay, there are limits on what you can collect in this local option levy. There is, first of all, the constitutional measure 5 limit. So remember, and this is important, every property has its own cap, its own limit, right? The $5, you take the $5 per thousand of real market value and you figure out, let's call that a theoretical limit for that property. That property cannot pay more than that $5 per thousand of real market value ever. You could have a $47 local option levy, it doesn't matter, you can't collect more than that $5. That's where, we're gonna revisit this term, that's where compression comes into play, okay? So that's the hard cap. So number one limit, $5 per thousand, okay? But what happened when we did measure 50 is we also had this wonderful world of equalization in school funding in the state. The state stepped in before measure 50, you were predominantly locally funded as a system, 2/3, in excess of 2/3 of your revenue was local money, and a third was the state. We have now absolutely inversed that, and actually probably getting a little more. We're probably like 3/4 state-funded system and a quarter local funded, right? So the state, because the state took that on, and through various lawsuits, there has to be some modicum of equality in funding across the system. They said, great, we're going to put a couple limits on your ability to collect revenue under this. These limits are important for other jurisdictions, probably not as meaningful for you all. But basically, there's a per student amount you can collect, a cap on per student amount, and that goes up at 3% a year. Okay. And there is a 25% of total state resources limit as well. So this idea that we didn't want people to be too far of an outlier if they were able to pass a local option levy, right? So a couple of limits that apply to jurisdictions. And they also said, look, we understand that not every school district has an equal ability to collect on the same levy rates, right? Your valuation in a school district may be significantly lower than, say, Lake Oswego's valuation, right? So they created an equalization grant program. They said, look, if you are below the 70th percentile in property value per student, and you're able to pass a local option levy, we'll provide you with a grant to equalize up to you being at that 70th percentile, right? So they will treat it as if you were at that level, you will collect that amount, right? And so, cheating ahead, Central School District, technically in 2025, would have been eligible, had you had a local option levy, you would have been eligible for a 75% match on that. So for every dollar you collected, you would have gotten 75 cents from the state. Pretty healthy match amount. I would note, this is legislatively appropriated. Okay, so this requires biennial legislative action to exist. Okay? Now it's existed for quite a while now. I mean, it wasn't original to 1997, but let's call it, early 2000. This thing comes into play, and it's been around ever since then. I would say that generally the recipients of it have been very small. One of the first recipients was Falls City. Hood River County School District receives. Funny enough, Beaverton School District receives an equalization grant because they are below the 70th percentile in property value per student. That surprises a lot of people. I say this with a couple of caveats. We know all too well how fickle the legislature can be at times. The local option equalization grant was on the Department of Ed's reduction list when they went into this short session and they were asked to provide options for reducing budget. So I note that it's never gone away. It's been around the whole time. However, it does come with that caveat. The other caveat I would add is there are some large school districts who are considering local option levies, not in the very immediate future, but we've done the same presentation for them, that would receive very healthy matches, which would all of a sudden create a very large number in that line item. And that line item is a carve out of the state school fund. Okay. So the target is not, it doesn't come out of Department of Human Services or Corrections or something like that. It comes out of all of your friends' districts, right? So like there's the zero-sum game in the format, right? What's that? The pie. It comes out of the fixed pie for sure. It's mostly going to come from Portland because they export taxes around the state, is what it is. But if, say, Salem Kaiser passed a local option levy and all of a sudden their equalization grant was, $8 million, that creates a big target. So just know that variable exists. By the way, stop me with questions as we go if you have them. I'm absolutely.
Just because you
yes.
mentioned Salem Kaiser, I
Yes.
mean, don't they have one like all the time?
They don't have a local option levy, no.
Okay, I thought
No,
they did.
they do not. They do not. They do have a bond levy,
Uh-huh.
but they do not have a local option levy in place. They've not ever attempted to pass one.
Okay,
There are
but they have
20,
operational bonds.
no,
Not
they're capital.
Okay. I
Capital.
thought they had
Capital.
operational.
No, only,
Okay.
There are 20 districts that have it, and at the end of the presentation, I have a list of all 20, so you'll be able to see who has a local option in place. Yeah. Okay,
So to clarify.
yes.
The levy cannot exceed, however much you collect, it cannot exceed on average $2,459.75 per student.
I mean, it can't exceed that number times your ADMW. So, you know, I've got a table where I've done this math for you. It's not an average. It's how much is $2,459 per student in the central school district? So that number times the number of kids you have, the weighted kids, that whatever that dollar amount generates, your levy can't exceed, you can't collect more than that. If it does, terrible things ensue. You have to send the money to the state. It gets washed in the state school fund formula, right? Not ideal. Anytime a district has approached that limit, there are a couple of districts that have from time to time. Ashland, Lake Oswego, and Portland Public have approached that limit. And a couple of things have either happened. One, the cap has been raised statutorily. Shocking. Or two, in the case of Portland, most recently, when they got close to it, they simply under-levied. They just said, we're just gonna under-levy. And then subsequent to that, downtown has cratered, and actually the local option levy is significantly under-collected at the moment too, but, or under-collecting based on their revenues. But that's the other method, is you just under-levy your levy. You would never want to actually over-levy and send money to other places on this. That would be, you could, just would be a little bit foolish. Okay, so then we get to this question of, okay, great. How do I figure out how much a local option levy will collect? So I get what it is, I kind of get where it exists, but you're like, great, now we're thinking about doing it. How do I know how much revenue that would generate for me as a school district? What would it mean? So then we got to start to sort of look into it a little deeper, and we got to do some fancy napkin math to figure this out. Okay, so let's remember, so this is the scale of property values statewide. So, you know, you can see the two lines diverging there in 1997. You see the dip, and then 3% or 3% plus, because there are years where your total growth in the community is over 3%, because you do have new construction. Again, we talked about construction coming out of the change property ratio, but overall, you're still going to be above 3%. And then you see the dashed line, that's real market value in the state. And you see what happened after 2008. Very acutely felt by our friends in Deschutes County. Their line actually dipped below the orange line here, and that a mechanism comes into place that suppresses your assessed value, your maximum assessed value, until you get back above that line. But nonetheless, and now you can see what's happened since then. The growth has been just continuing to widen. And this is just simply math, right? 3%, if I could just sort of put it in maybe a little pejorative terms, 3% is too low, right? For the kind of housing value that Oregon has and historically had, barring housing crises of the nature that happened in 08, not the kind of housing crises we have now. The kind of housing crises we have now are exaggerating growth, right? You know, 3%, we just don't historically have 3% growth. We historically, even in average times, have more like 4.5% value or 5% value. And so every year you have something exceeding 3%, you're widening that gap. So this gap gets wider, right, as we go. And we're going to tax in that gap, right? And so we say, great, what does that look like? Well, let's understand. Now, remember I said, measure 5, the $5 per thousand is property by property. So the same dynamic exists here. When understanding how much a local option levy can collect, you have to understand property by property what's going to happen when you levy this. Okay, so let's understand what we're talking about. There are multiple kinds of property in jurisdiction, right? Duh. Residential, commercial, industrial, there are other bifurcated, but let's do those big three are kind of the way to think about it, right? So residential property is generally going to have a much wider gap between real market value and assessed value than almost any other type of property, okay? I believe this is your average. No, your average is actually 52%. So our little sample here even thinks you got more value than that. But the average in Central is the average property is 52%, assessed value is 52% of the real market value, right? So just about half. And in fact, that's average of all properties. So because I know how this works, I know that means your residential properties are 50% or less of their real market value. So the homework for you all today is to go home, and if you own your property, pull out your property tax bill and look on there, and you will see real market value, assessed value. Real market value may not reflect actually what you can sell it for. I'm betting for most of you, it's probably suppressed a little bit because there's not a ton of value in the assessor staying up to date on the real market value of your property because we're not really collecting on that anyway. So that's a little less accurate, but it is going to be pretty decent, right? And it's going to be about 50% of your assessed of your real market value. Your assessed value will be 50%. Okay. So we have a big gap on that on our house here, but now let's look at commercial. This is obviously you don't have a target in Central, but an example of how this works on commercial property. And I think I do have an example of a specific property a little later. This real market value property, this property has a real market value of 30 million, but because commercial property operates in a really different space than residential, it has more depreciating asset base in it. So think the checkout stands and things like that are actual property that are taxed under the property tax system. Those can be depreciated over time rather than appreciated, right? So you're going to keep your gap between assessed value and real market value much closer. Not to mention, commercial property is way more subject to the business cycle when it comes to valuations, right? So you will have more declines down and up in valuation, right? So this example here, this commercial property, their assessed value is about 80% of their real market value. So while in dollars, you're going to collect a lot because this is a big piece of property with a ton of value, your gap is much narrower, right? But what does that mean? So how do we figure out what that means to you all? Okay, so calculating your local option revenue. It's the sum of all those gaps. So think about those two properties. They each have a gap separately. We need to add them together. There's no averaging that happens. All of this will happen in real time. Like if you actually have a local option levy, it happens on a property by property basis. So what is the gap on each property? So to figure out your capacity, you would literally add up all of the gaps of all of the thousands of property tax accounts in the district, right? To figure that gap out, right? Some of your properties may already be at that $5 Measure 5 limit. Our commercial property here had some gap. You have commercial properties that are at 100% of their real market value. And by the way, newsflash, your permanent rate collections collectively, the school district, the ESD, and the community college, exceed $5.
Yeah.
Right? It's $5.80. We'll get to it. So already you know the above. So if you have 100% assessed value to real market value, that property is not even going to pay their full permanent rate collection, right? Then you only pay $5. Can't pay anything more, right? So this gets a little wonky. So gosh, how do we figure that out? How do we determine who does and doesn't have it? Well, this is I said we don't get much out of this. This is the one spot, if you were interested in pursuing, you could pay us a small fee to do a property by property analysis and figure out, we'll literally get from the assessor the entire property tax roll, and we're going to go through every single property account, clean it all up, and do that math, right? So that is one spot. You don't always have to do that, but there are a wide variety of reasons why you may decide to do that, whether it be precision or credibility or some other dynamic. But I just throw that out there. Okay. Only jurisdictions with consolidated tax rates below that limit you ignore that. Your consolidated rate is above $5, so ignore that bullet point. This is where we get to now. So this is like, okay, great, I get it. It's super complex. It's property by property. Some properties will pay some properties will pay all of it, some properties will pay none. How do we really begin to think about that if I want to get my head around? Because what you're faced with before you would even want to pay us to do some math or decide not to pay us and decide to go on the ballot anyway, before you did that, you want to be like, well, is it worth it? Will it collect an amount of money on a levy rate that I think the voters would tolerate that will make a difference for the district, right? So that's where we begin to look at some math. We start to do some math. And thankfully, I'm not going to dwell on this slide at all because there's a whole ton of numbers on there. What I've done instead is I've broken out the very last column, and that is the fiscal 2026. Okay. And so for fiscal 2026, we have a number of data points on here to point at. Okay, so we're going to start up in our top left corner over here. You've got 3,700-ish kids on a weighted basis, right? And you've got about $43 million in state school fund revenues coming in, okay? That's data point one. That matters for our caps later on. Data point number two, what are the permit rates, right? Newsflash, I was pretty close, I said 480. 488.34 is the school district permit rate, right? So that's unchangeable. You can't do anything about that. It is what it is, fixed in time. Community college at 62 cents and the ESD at just under 30 cents for a consolidated education rate of $5.80, 5.806, $5.80 and change, right? And of course, you might remember I said you can't levy more than $5 for all education. True. So anybody that this 580 would collect more than what $5 would generate, what we're going to do is we're going to compress each of those rates on a pro rata basis in order to get down to $5. So they'll all give a little bit and end up with that property only paying $5, right? Okay, so the county does report this. Okay, so underneath that, I've got a box, current compression loss. So they do report, counties, you have multiple counties, that you currently are losing $48,591 due to compression, right? You are currently collecting, where do I got it? $11.4 million in local property taxes. You're losing $48,500. That's not a lot, right? Okay. However, there are properties in compression. There are properties right now that are not paying the full permit rate. So anybody right now that would show up under that current compression loss list, they would pay $0 on a local option levy, not a single bit. Because remember I said those three rates will be compressed on that house that exceeds the $5. Well, in statute, they said, we don't want local option levies to cannibalize permanent rates. So local option levies come all the way down to 0 first before any permanent rates get compressed, right? On the education side, this only is the one levy. ESDs do not have local option levy authority. Community colleges have this really weird, very hyper-specific one. No one's ever done it because it's a really limited approach. So it's really just school districts, right? So it would be your levy being compressed to 0 before the rest happens. This actually happens a lot on the local government side. So think about police, fire, maybe a library levy, maybe any other parks levy that's not a permanent jurisdiction, right? Any local option levies, when you have overlapping ones, they all start to get compressed in a pro rata basis before the city, county permit rates get compressed. And there is like weird competitive nature that happens in those where jurisdictions will go out and try to pass progressively higher levy rates so that they are collecting more at the end of the day versus the ones that are below them. It's a weird dynamic. Some really interesting news stories of what happened in Mid-Valley down sort of Sweet Home Lebanon area when they went through this. But
We have 2 of those local option levies. Polk Fire.
Yep.
In our district has one, and Polk County Public Safety levies. So those are already factored
Right.
in there.
And those are all operating on the local government side of the ledger, right? They've got their $10 limit and whatever they are, I didn't look up their permit rates, et cetera. But yeah, they would be competing with each other. They don't compete with you, right? You stand alone. You're only competing with yourself in this instance. Okay, so we've got some data on what's already happening in the district. Okay, so now let's start to look at some math. So we know your total real market value in the central school district is $3.8 billion, right? That's the value of all taxable property in the district. Well, the assessed value of all of that property is just a hair under $2 billion for a 52% ratio, okay? So your tax collections occur on that $2 billion, not on that 3.8 billion. But that's, again, this is the gap we talked about. Okay, you're currently collecting, you're levying 11.52 million, but you've got to net out the compression. So your net total is this $11.4 million that you're collecting in local property tax collections for all education, not just the district, but all education, right? And then you have this measure 5 limit. If I applied simply the $5 across the board to all of your taxpayers, all that, go back to that real market value, that means you'd have a total capacity. You could collect no more than $19 million, or for a capacity of an additional capacity of 7.5 million. So first math step, theoretically, you could levy a local option levy that would collect $7.5 million. That's like the maximum amount you could collect. And funny enough, if we skip all the way over to the right column, that actually is the lesser limit on you. So the limits apply. Remember, the per student, the 25% total resources, or measure 5. The limit that applies would be the lesser of those three. Whatever the lower amount, that's the limit. For you guys, that is your measure 5 capacity. You have less measure 5 capacity than either of those two, per student or statutory limits. I don't know why per student is bolded in that instance. That's a legacy piece. Yours is the measure 5 capacity, right? So theoretically, great. Go out for a levy, collect $7.59 million. Fantastic. That'd be a really high levy rate, really high. And because of this wonderful thing of compression, it actually would be insanely high because you get these really diminishing returns on properties that are at compression. So, like, don't chase that one. But we can start by looking at just some, and this is the napkin math. Okay, so this is where it gets easy. And let's call these theoretical maximums at different levy rates. And really easy, you just multiply your rate times the AV divided by 1,000, right? So $1, that's where simple math comes into play. 1.985 billion times $1 is 1.985 billion, divided by 1,000 is 1.985 million. So $1 per 1,000 local option levy would collect a maximum collection of 1.98, so just a hair under $2 million annually, right? Fantastic. This would be the spot where I would say, if this doesn't pass the smell test, don't pass go, right? There are jurisdictions for which we've done this. It's been a while because the gap is getting wider and wider, but there are jurisdictions where we've done this math and it just doesn't pass the smell. It's not enough to make a difference in their district, right? Lakeview is a poster child for this. So they're those small and really low property value in Lakeview, right? And so they're a kind of a poster child for that. But you're like, okay, great. At those interesting levy rates, $1 million at 50 cents, just a $2 million at $1, or $1.50 is, just about $3 million. Those are worth pursuing. They're worth having a conversation. This is also then when I would say, I guarantee you, if you levied any of those, you pass it, hooray. You will not collect that amount. It will be less than that amount, right? Because remember, there are properties in compression. So we know that some people are not going to pay. So let's think about how we might begin to estimate that without doing the full property by property analysis, helping you understand what that means. So let's look at some examples. Okay, so let's go back to our base residential. And here I've updated the math to match your 52%, right? So this is a house with a real market value of 500,000. It could sell tomorrow for $500,000. But its assessed value is 52%, so that's $260,000. Let's take your permanent rate collections up there. You can see what those are, your rate and then the taxes imposed, because we do remind people, if you look at your property tax bill, there are no rates on your property tax bill, right? There are just taxes imposed. The assessor does the math and imposes the tax amount, right? So tax imposed. So under your permanent rate collections, this house is paying about $1,500 a year in education property taxes. If we add $1.50 local option levy, that's $390 in additional levy for a new total of $1,899. But remember, measure 5 is the cap. So what's the theoretical limit for this house? Well, that's easy, right? $5 times 500,000 is $225,000, right? That's the max. Well, you're well below that. This house will pay their full freight. They're paying their permanent rate. They'll pay their local option levy. Bob's your uncle, right? Good to go. Well, let's say that house actually is situated in funky, and this is probably not going to be in a lot of cases, but let's say it happens to be 80% of its real market value. So it's a $500,000 real market value house that has an AV 80%. So it's got a $400,000 assessed value. Well, we see right off the bat, they're paying a decent amount more in taxes imposed, right? $2,300. Add the $1.50 local option levy for $600. We're now at a new total of $2,900. Well, my Measure 5 limit didn't change because this is the same real market value as the other house, right? So my Measure 5 limit at $2,500, this house is exceeding that by $422. So we've got to compress out of the local option levy $422. So this house would have an effective local option levy of 44 cents per thousand. Of that $1.50, they'll pay 44 cents of it, right? At 80% ratio. Okay. Make sense? By and large, you will see less and less of this property and more of this property. And this is where it's important to note, the local option levy often will operate much like a residential property tax. Because let's get into commercial and industrial. Here's an actual, that's a stock image, but this is an actual property in the district, right? It is a market, a grocery store. So we take our permanent rate collections and we've got 17,500. We had our local option levy at $4 or at $1.50 for 4,500. New total of 22,000. Well, the Measure 5 capacity for this property was 15,129. Well, geez, I go all the way back up and I'm collecting more than that in permanent rate. Well, that they're not collecting more than that. They're not paying that, right? So this piece of property will underpay by $4,500. In fact, they will underpay their permanent rate by $2,400, right? They are paying $0 on the local option levy. In fact, they're not paying the full permanent rate collections because their value is 100% of their real market value. It is identical. This is actually, you go to the assessor, this is a piece of property that exists. I can see exactly what it's assessed at, right? Because assessed value is public information. These are not private. It's not private information.
And David, how about those that are in,
Urban renewal
yeah,
districts?
renewal?
Yeah, I mean, urban renewal will function a little bit. It will, if a property is in an urban renewal district, it'll actually give you more gap. Because you're transferring that amount of tax value to the local government side of the $10 and $5, right? So.
And sadly, a lot of the big development in both cities is
in urban renewal. So urban renewal functions poorly for permanent rate collections. The school district is getting less of the permanent rate.
Right.
However, that's all washed in the state school fund formula. So let's say you guys are 0.5% of the state.
Right.
For every dollar you lose in urban renewal collections, you're only losing 5 cents. You're not, it's like, okay, great. That's in measure, well, 50 cents, excuse me, I can't do math. You're just not losing very much on it. So it's not that big of a deal for every $100. Okay, but for local option levy, because that tax collection is transferred to the local government side, it makes their compression worse,
right?
But it alleviates compression on your side. So if a portion of this is in the urban renewal district, then correct, the math will change a little bit because it'll transfer over to the local government side and thus creating space. This actually was a really interesting question that came up a number of years ago. There's statute around extending urban renewal, the life of urban renewal districts that require approval from overlapping jurisdictions, right? The Tigard-Walden School District was, the city of Tigard was seeking approval from the Tigard-Walden School District to extend an urban renewal district. And generally, education historically has said, no, we don't like urban renewal because you're taking money out of our pocket. Well, Tigard-Walden did the math and realized we better vote to extend this, because if we don't, it's actually gonna lower our local option levy collections, and local option levy money I get to keep. I don't get to keep my permanent rate collections, they get washed in the formula, right? So it's funny. The further we get on from measure 5 and 50, the more hybridized the system gets in weird ways. Okay, so this is a large commercial property that would be this way, right? Here's another piece of property in the jurisdiction. This is a large senior home property. It has a valuation, a real market value of about 8.3 million, and a assessed value of 7.2. So 74% is their ratio. You see that also operate a little bit like the 80% house, right? So we do have some gaps. So your measure 5 limit is 41.7. We see with our local option levy, we're collecting 45,000. So our permanent rates are below that 41, but the local option levy puts it above it. That means we're going to compress out $3,500 from this property. They're going to end up paying an effective rate of 93 cents instead of the $1.50. So you can see there is a break point here, right? As we go down this assessed value ratio limit in seeing what different properties would pay on this. But it is where I caution people, often we like to say, oh, look, whatever, our commercial center is going to pay this, or large property tax owner is going to pay this. Not really. The bulk of this will be paid by your residential taxpayers. So as you embark on this as a conversation with the public, make sure you are aware of that and understand that dynamic, right? Residential, whether they are voting residential taxpayers or non-voting residential taxpayers, doesn't matter. They also don't have to be in residence if they just happen to own property in the jurisdiction, right? Second home values, that sort of thing.
And
Okay.
a reminder also that the biggest property in the city of Monmouth is not taxed Western Oregon.
Right. Non-taxable is completely not on this ledger at all. You don't see it anywhere. They're just not paying anything.
They're not gonna pay that.
Yeah.
They don't.
There's also funkiness with like farm deferrals and some of that stuff. Again, those are gonna be on the margin of this. Okay, so great. We've seen that. I see where probably my residential taxpayers are gonna pay full freight, and probably a lot of my commercial industrial are gonna pay something between 0 and let's call it 80–90%, right? Like there's gonna be this window in there. Okay, so how much can I collect? So we go back to our theoreticals here and we say $1.50 levy at $2.9 million. David, what do you think? And this is where I say, gosh, I just don't know. And I say, if you want to go forward without doing any sort of deeper analysis, you have to make an educated guess about the district. That's really what you're left with. And the educated guess is trying to understand what is the mix between residential and non-residential property. That's really what it comes down to, right? I do have some data points we can give you though. We can look at what is the experience other districts have, okay? So this is every district in the state and their local option levy, the rate that they're imposing, and then the amount they're losing to compression. So this would be where you might look up and down this list and say, gee, is there a district on here that I think looks like us? And by looks like us, I don't mean in the mid-valley or whatever. It really, again, remember, this is property mix. It's not even property value. It's property mix, residential versus non-residential. And you can see where this breaks. Our friends at the top have the highest levy rate, but they also have the highest loss to compression. You see they're losing almost 26% or $38 million in their local option levy due to compression. And they're actually collecting that 109. They're actually going to come in below that 109 this year. And then next year they'll be lower because downtown Portland is cratered in valuation, right? I actually think downtown Portland is getting better from a being their perspective. Our houses are down. But values are absolutely going through the ground. I mean, the Big Pink selling all of these, every major property owner in downtown Portland is appealing the valuation of the property right now. So they're going to have significant drop. So and they're the anomaly for a wide range. So take them off the list. But if it makes you feel any better, they're losing out on a whole bunch of them. Doesn't always make people. So we look at this list and we see maybe places we start to look at, like the Corvallises of the world, or the Philomaths, or the Sherwoods. And we look at their property mix and we think maybe some of those might start to look a little bit more like Central, right? And I do see a trend on this. I see this between 10 and 15% loss to compression. As you move down the spectrum, the sort of average will dip because your levy rate is less, therefore you're trying to collect less under that. But I think like this is where if you wanted to go forward and you said, great, David, give us your best advice for what we would put on the ballot. And let's say you want to go for $1.50. I'd say give yourself a 15% haircut on what you think it's going to collect and then go forward. Now, unlike say a bond where you're putting a par amount on the ballot and saying, hey, we need 40 million. You're not giving your haircut on that. When you pass a local option levy, the collections will be what the collections are. Your estimates don't matter. You're not bound by that. You're levying should you choose to seek approval for a rate based in dollars. You get approval for $1.50, your $1.50 will collect what $1.50 collects. That's both encouraging and a word of caution, right? So a Sherwood School District on here, there are good recent example of the note of caution. So they were in fiscal distress and they went on the ballot with $1.50. And they got it. Their voters supported them and said, great, we'll vote for that. They originally estimated something like this $8 million we have listed here because they felt like they were vast majority a residential district. Well, it turns out they actually have a lot more commercial and a lot more utility property than they thought. Transmission lines and substations and stuff out there in suburban land. And so they undercollected based on what they were originally projecting. Good news is they're collecting and they got additional funding. They're getting $7 million a year to help support the kids in Sherwood. That's fantastic. They just had to reset their expectations about what that was going to be. That matters for a couple of reasons. It mostly matters that when you think about the timing of when you want to do this. Okay, so we are working with our friends in Canby. You don't see Canby on this list. But if you read the Oregonian, you know Canby is asking their voters on the May ballot for a local option. Okay? Well, if they pass in May, they can immediately levy it on the fiscal 27 property taxes. Okay? So they would like to probably include that in their fiscal 27 budget, which they're working on right now, like you all are about to embark on or already started on, right? But they don't actually get the money. You don't collect the money until property tax bills come due in November, right? So if you overestimate, if you put this on the ballot, you passed it in May, you're too late to do it in May. So, hooray, you don't have to deal with this problem. You put it in May and you passed your budget. And let's say you're Sherwood and you put 8 million in your budget and you staffed up according to that 8 million. Well, November comes around and you're only getting 7 million. Well, guess what? You've got to cut $1 million out of your budget. Right? Or spend it out of reserves or whatever. You have a new $1 million hole that you didn't expect on top of a new tax that you just passed. My God, that's terrible, right? So it really is about that. How do you manage really the first year of the local option levy? Even if you do a good job with the math, maybe you pay us a little bit and we do a good job on the math. Even if you did all that, you would still probably want to hedge a little bit in that first budget. So what I've suggested it can be. I don't know if they're doing this in their budget, and obviously they will know if it's passed. So if it doesn't pass, well, great. They don't have anything. If it passes, they did not pay us to do an analysis. I said you might, if it passes, you could consider having us run you an analysis after it passes. Now you've got an infusion of funds coming in. We can go ahead and do it. And in the interest of full disclosure, it's like a $10,000 assessment. This is not like a $100,000 task. You pay us to do that, and then you would have reliability as you begin the budget, right? That would be one path they could go down. The other path they could go down is you could basically really hedge in that first budget. So maybe it was going to be 7 million on this max. Maybe you carve off 15% for your ballot estimate, but maybe you actually budget maybe another 10% off of that, knowing that you could add once the year is started. Let's get to November. We see that turn in maybe for second semester. Now I add more programs in going forward, right? The last thing you want to do is get off on a bad budget foot from day one after having just asked your voters to raise taxes, right? That's not a good story to tell. And Sherwood struggled with that for sure. They're now several years into this and, people have transient memories and nobody remembers anymore. But so as you think about that, that's the memory piece, right? Is you take whatever levy rate number you want, and probably for a reasonable estimate, you give yourself about a 15% haircut on that. And that's how you might determine what's the value of this local option levy. So you all know your community better than better than I do for sure, and better than most. And so knowing where is that break point of what services to kids can we sell at these different levy rates, and that, that we can take out to the community, and that dollar amount X, you go forward with that perspective, right?
So how does that 75% equalization grant impact those?
So additive, right, on top of that. So if whatever you collect, so let's say you levy the 150, instead of collecting 2.9 million, let's say you end up collecting 2.5 million. Now, 0.75x on top of that would be additional revenue that you would get from the state. There is
Up to 70%, up to the 70.
no, your math that gets you to 70th percentile would be a 75% match on that. So let's do that math. Let's go 25 divided by 0.75. That would be, you'd net 3.3 million, right, at the end of the day. Right. The quirk, the one other quirk, the caveats about legislature, the one quirk is there is a lag before you receive the grant, right? The legislature, right, like if Canby passes in May, they will not get a grant for fiscal 27 because you're inside of a biennium for which the dollars have already been appropriated for. If you, however, pass in November, you passed this, let's say you were on this next November ballot, you passed, you wouldn't be levying until fiscal 28. And therefore it would be in the Department of Ed's budget that they submit during the next legislative session. They would submit inclusive of, here's all the districts that have local option levies and what they're expected to collect in fiscal 28 and beyond. That actually may sort of beg for better math because you want to make sure you're maximizing that grant opportunity at that time, right? But it is always a lag, a biennial lag, the weird quirk. So, if you pass during a biennium, you don't get the grant until the next biennium. So November of an even numbered year and May of an odd numbered year of the presidential cycle, of the gubernatorial cycle, are the times when you don't have any lag because you're right into the next one.
But I think that's a valued point because again, if we were to choose to do this, and again, this is a beginning discussion, right? This is not making any decisions, right? I think that's a big part of that because when you work through that, you just have to know, hey, we have this. And again, I'm gonna say, if we were to pass it in a mid biennium, we have to keep in our budget mind as we come to the budget committee and with you all, hey, this X amount is not gonna be seen for another year. And would be added on, I call it like the end of that piece. And so we would build budgets from that perspective.
Yeah.
The upside is
to be
you have
able
more
to do that.
clarity what the amount is.
Correct,
The downside is you have to wait.
correct.
So, okay, so some summary points, right? Local option levy is probably the only source of significant additional revenue you have locally to you. That's like the only other tool school districts have, right? Every property is different and it's going to impact every property differently. And that makes it hard to predict, the amount you would collect at the end of the day. We've been talking about this as revenue collections, which it is. But because assessed value will vary year over year and property by property, and there may be some properties for which assessed value might decrease in a year. And we talk about Portland Public with downtown. You don't have a downtown highways, but think of it along those perspectives. Commercial industrial might have decreases in their assessed value. Some home values might have decreases. Therefore, your local option levy could decrease year over year. It wouldn't always increase. Now, generally, through history, it will generally always be on an upward trajectory, even with things like compression, but there is variability. So for districts that embark on a local option levy journey, the other advice I generally give, and it's advice I gave when I was in school districts, is think about reserving a portion of it, right? So think about reserving to ward off that variability. Right now, you all are very insulated from the ups and downs of property value, right? Because your promo rates are washed in the state school fund formula. Say what we will about state funding, it's pretty stable, right? Doesn't go up very much, but it's stable, it's predictable, right? Local option levy is less stable, less predictable, but it is additional revenue that you keep local, right? So important to note. That's it. Happy to answer any questions.
How would these funds be allocated?
I think, so that's part of that conversation that we would have to have. So again, not, I'm gonna put capital aside because there is not really, you know, we've talked about capital with some of the things that we'd have to do. I think if we want to go in that direction, that we would have to have a much depthier conversation of what the focus would be, because again, when you look at this summary, and David, will you go back 2 slides, I think it is? Yeah, so again, just looking at the theoretical maximum, I'll just as an example. When we were talking about the bond, I'm gonna use air conditioning, right? Because we're getting closer to the end of the school year and we have hot weather, right? So 3 buildings to get air conditioning was over $7 million. That's not gonna get us anywhere close to that, as an example. And remember, the reason that cost is high is because IES, we'd have to completely redo the electrical. That's where the big cost is from that perspective, just to lay context to that. So these would be things like programmatic pieces. So if we were to have to get into a point, curriculum adoptions, right? Paying for curriculum more consistently, although we're trying to do a better job of that when they're coming up with the state, but additional teachers if, you know, we are having issues potentially of getting above a class size protocol that we have. If we were ever at a point where we had to cut things like a music program or PE, that's happened in past years, not again, what we're looking at right now, but that is something that we're gonna have to pay attention to. Again, I'm very transparent. Our enrollment continues to go down. As I said at the last board meeting, we're 2895. That's going to impact us moving forward. We'll share a little bit more about that with you next Monday as we start the budget committee process. But those are the types of things on the operations side that we could spend it on: curriculum, staffing. I would say some low maintenance. There's some maintenance things you can do, but you have to be, right, it can't be capital, but there is some maintenance pieces.
To be clear, it can be capital.
Or it can be
It
capital.
can be anything you want it to be.
Correct.
As long as it, yeah.
It's just capital runs expensive.
Yes.
Completely.
Correct. So we could do
I
a
mean,
combination of
you
that.
could say, we'll do the high school group. We're gonna spend every dollar on the high school group because that's gonna be every dollar. That's just a line item in your regular budget.
So you'd have to set it up.
Yeah, but that,
everyone.
I want to be clear,
Would
the
be-
budget, that just even looking at the $1.50, the roof of the high school is gonna be 10 million.
Yeah.
So it's not even gonna
But
get
that's
meets that.
every year for 5 years.
Understand, yep,
Yeah,
100%, yes,
But
so
if you
absolutely,
ever
Susan.
add teaching staff, then you can't do teaching
Yeah.
staff for 3 years and then do the roof in the next 2 or.
Unless you lay off all
Because
these.
you still.
And the reason I say this, I think as,
Can you what?
Can you raffle the money?
You can reserve the funds
yeah,
in
that's
any
what I was
form.
just gonna say.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
So
You can
over
build it
time, you
up.
can
We
reserve,
could,
build it
yes.
up and have.
A little statewide perspective, just for what it's worth. Obviously, the funds, what this discussion is getting at and what Jen is getting at, of course, the funds are available for at literally any purpose you want, right? You could go buy cars for staff, like that's a legally allowable purchase in the district. It's unadvisable, but it is a legally allowable purchase, right?
we would not be doing that. I want to be clear
Yeah.
publicly.
I'm not putting it in.
You know,
Not gonna happen.
No district helicopter.
I will say that almost every district that has a local option levy in place uses it to fund teaching staff. Now, that does a couple of things. Teaching staff is permanent ongoing expense, right? So you can't 1 year fund teaching staff and next year fund something different. However, there's nothing that says 100% we do teaching staff. So maybe some portion of it is teaching staff. Or maybe 100% of it is teaching staff but some of that is stuff you were funding out of your existing general fund that you're moving.
Right,
Yeah.
like,
So,
like our sped that we're not getting fully funded on, that's taking money away from other programs, if that was gonna cover sped.
Correct. I mean, and I think, go ahead.
What funding PERS?
I don't know that,
well, I mean, PERS is just a payroll cost.
because that's a
right?
payroll,
So
so.
you are paying that.
We are paying that in our employment as
Just
part of that
Add
process.
a new line item or a new teaching staff or something, you would just have more money to pay that and not be making cuts to cover the increases in birds.
So this wouldn't be in lieu of what was turned down by the public, the bond.
Right.
So are we gonna still pursue that coming up, because we're still needing a building?
Again, I think part of this is, part of what I wanted to put this in front of you is, I think, one, I'm gonna say probably because we're past the date of having to do any of this, and I would, my advice to you all, and it's your choice of this, is if we need to give ourselves a year of planning to do any of that, whether we're talking bond or whether we're talking about a levy. So partly I'm just bringing that to you now, because a year from now, could be May, where we could be in a spot to potentially have this conversation.
Because you're gonna do one or the other, obviously, you're not gonna do both.
Well, you all, it's not, so I wanna be clear about that. The superintendent, you all get to vote on that. I have no voice in this outside of bringing you.
In general, we would
Yeah.
do one or the other.
Correct. I think that the concern I have, and I think this is when we get to our, I call it a retreat day, but it's more of a workshop that we do in June. I think it's worth us having a conversation about the bond and the rate that is coming on here in 3 years? Because it got pushed off to 2030. I think that is going to be a really tough to add more onto it, because our rate is gonna go back up because of the way that bond in 2009 was done. Again, none of us were here, but we have to now, as the school district, work through that. So I think both of those conversations we probably need to have again, of looking at that and saying, okay, do we want to go to a smaller bond, or do we want to potentially do some sort of,
Would this be more palatable, do you think? That presenting this to?
Well, a smaller number,
It's a smaller.
and as we've talked about, like that, the long length of the bond, the interest is the thing that a lot of people object to, and you don't have that with this.
Mm.
One of the other things that some community members brought up that, is that there was some trust issues, and so maybe smaller number where we can do some things right away might, develop some more trust in the community among people that have that issue. I mean, there's a lot of reasons this is interesting. I'm not 100% sold yet, but,
Somebody said 5 years, I didn't catch that, so it's
Yeah,
this is
5
5 years?
That's a great question. The local option levy is a serial levy, so if you can only seek approval for 5 years, and then you have to be back on the ballot seeking renewal. I would note that the first instance, getting the first approval, is hard. Like, don't underestimate this. You're asking people to raise their taxes. Renewals, however, have generally been passing at, say, 70% rate.
And that's where
Renewals have been much easier.
that's where the trust comes in, because they start to see the trust. And so we're willing to do this.
I mean, in Beaverton, one of the things we did, once we passed it, is at our monthly, finance report to the board, we would have attached a list of all the schools in the district. Now, there's a few, there's 35 schools in Beaverton, and the number of teachers the levy was funding at each school. And we would, there is a lot you can do to be very intentional and transparent about where the money is being used. That then helps people understand, oh, okay, I get it, my taxes are going to that. So to your question about, can you reserve some of it? Politically, I would say reserve other money. Spend the local option levy, use it to alleviate pressure in other parts of your budget. You wanna add something, you're gonna add some program, and you're gonna offload from the general fund to it. So that way now your general fund has space for maybe some additional reserving that you need to do, right?
paying back what we took out of our
Of other
reserves.
reserves,
Sure.
yeah.
True, also.
that we used to have.
Yeah, we had to use that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going one or the other, I would say if these building needs are, dire, then we're gonna need to really consider.
Yeah.
Where we're putting that.
Yeah.
Can we accelerate payment on that bond that's due 2040?
Can we get what?
Is there an early?
No, that's the whole problem.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Because because it's not, because we cannot reassess it,
They,
which is most bonds.
no, they
I'm
are,
not saying reassess it,
No.
use the levy to
No.
pay it off.
Yeah, you
no, you
can't
cannot
really.
prepay, they're not prepayable, they were sold as
Non-callable bonds,
deferred interest,
non-callable.
Yeah.
not callable.
And again, I think part of this is why, one, I wanna have, we wanted to bring this to you, and because it's important that we look at all of the options that we have. Again, I think a continued conversation about this, I think now that we've had this presentation, I think even you all, we have a board meeting in 2 weeks of just what your thoughts are, how do we continue this conversation? Do we move that into the work time that we do usually in June? And this is, we're having a robust conversation, bringing back out some of the things from the bond, using some of this presentation to talk through what that might look like. Mark, what you said, yeah, are buildings getting older? Yes. Are our maintenance people amazing? Yes. Am I a hair away from a HVAC blowing and having hundreds of thousands of dollars? Possibly. And so that's just what this type of approach would give us more flexibility for where we are right now. Again, it may not be the best path. The bond, we may need to figure out, is the bond the best path, but
I
the
do like
cost is gonna be.
Flexibility of this.
Yeah.
That you can utilize the funds,
Yeah.
and.
I think the hard part
that's the
about-
part.
I think the hard part about that, which we thought, again, we were clear on the bond of what the areas we're going to spend it in, and the community wanted let me rephrase that. Some of the community wanted more specificity.
Mhm.
So I think, where does that play in with this?
Right.
Yeah.
Because I think that will
Sure.
also potentially for some of our community be part of that conversation. Again, I want to believe that we're building trust more. That's always my hope. And I think we are across the district. That doesn't mean that everybody feels that way and across the community. But I think that we are working hard to try and build that trust because of some of the things that we're just having to work through. Other questions for David? Otherwise, I'm gonna let him go. We'll take I'll ask for a quick recess, and then we can do our last little bit here.
And I do wanna say about the 2030 bond, when we talk about a big jump. There's actually, a little, once that starts getting paid off, once you hit 2027, 28, it's only 3% a year increase. So it's not a big giant jump from what we're doing now. The only problem is we're paying off not only the one we've prepaid, but we're paying up a 2015 refunding bond. So we actually go up a little bit to pay those. Then we actually have a smaller debt service for a year before it goes up. But once it goes up 3%.
Yeah.
So
The up and down is really confusing. For
yeah, it's
people.
actually, the problem is actually where we go down for a year and we leave that up. So
Yeah.
Just-
The last time we ran, I pulled up your stuff.
well, we did a prepayment, David said,
Yeah,
you have to,
it's like you level out in 2030 at about $2.48.
Yeah, I think that, and again, if we were to have any, and I mean this, if we were to have any type of catastrophe, one, we're gonna go to insurance, see what's covered. That'll be to a degree, I'll just say it that way. And then two, we'll have to go get some sort of loan. We're not gonna have choices, right? As a school district, right now, if that were to happen, that would be the approach we would have to do. which would then become bigger things than what
Yeah,
financially we
because
would
then
have to
we
deal
would be
with.
Paying debt service on the loan.
So, right, like that is, I want to be clear with the board, that is our reality, that if we were to have anything big happen, that is our only approach that we would be able to do, one,
We
insurance and
used
then
to
two.
try to keep, one to actually $1.5 million in a contingency. We were able to do that, and those got wiped out last year. They got moved into the general fund to try to pay for.
Special education,
Where we at?
curriculum,
We have
Is the high school
dollars set
road
aside as a
like in
contingency.
any moment kind of collapse?
no, no. It's part of the, I want to be clear, the high school roof on the new side
Yeah.
is fine. It's where the two meet with the old, that's the problem. But the 10 million is, yeah, we would want to redo, with a roof. You all know, you don't partially do your roof, you do your roof. And so that's why the cost is so much. So it's really that one section, Jan, on the, I call that the
South-
west, south side.
Didn't you say they had tried to patch it before already? And it's just, patching is not working.
It's patched, right? And it's patched to the
Yeah.
degrees that we can do it as an example.
Is there partial sections or is it one solid piece? I mean, are there different divisions?
There's different divisions out there.
Okay, so there is.
Where they joined the
So there is
buildings, I
options
think that's
then
a problem.
for,
Well,
or not.
the part that's bad is all bad.
Yeah.
It's,
And
I'm
it's,
just wondering if it's sectional, like, or if it's one long.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so as an example, hold on, Cece. Hold
Yeah.
on, Cece. I think one of the things that we could, that again, having this conversation could be, hey, just, if we were to go out for a levy as an example, one of the things could say is, yep, we're gonna try and reserve that money to take care of the south side
Yeah.
of the high school's gym roof, excuse me. As an example. So I think that's some of the conversations we need to have in a little bit more time. Again, that half day that we tend to do our workshop in June, I think is probably a good thing for us to put on this subject on the agenda, and just as a board having, what are you concerned? What are your thoughts? Just at least start to see if there's a direction that you all may want to go from that perspective. But I think this is an important piece. Again, if we're April and let's say we were to want to do something in May, we at least wanted to put this in front of you to give you like, here is something else. Not saying that this is what we're gonna do, but it is worth looking at and just at least having a pretty robust conversation.
do we have any hint of what the voters might think for this kind of a?
We'll be putting this.
We rejected all taxes last time.
Yeah.
I think taxes is a big thing. I think taxes is a big thing. I think people are starting, I think there's gonna be a lot of just things that are gonna happen within the next year. So.
Yeah.
It could be a window of opportunity. I think community may see it differently. But again, until we start having this conversation, and again, this will be out on our YouTube page. I'm probably gonna have Emily write a short story about the board having the conversation in our next community letter. Here's a link to it. You can go listen to what the presentation is, so we can start getting the information out to see then if we get anything from community members. Because we have community members that will watch this.
Yeah.
That's why we appreciate them, because I think it's important that they're involved in what the decisions and sharing with all of us in whatever form they do, to where their views are right now. Doesn't mean that we can't educate and work through that, but I think this is why we wanted to start just today on an educational side of what a levy really is. Any other last questions for David? Otherwise, I'm gonna ask for a recess and then he can go home. And thank you.
Thank you all for having me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
He says.
All right, recess. I'm gonna pause this. Back recording.
Back in session.
Okay, so real quickly, because I know this came Friday, or excuse me, I should say Saturday, because we were still gathering information. So in front of you are two documents. The first, which is, I call it yellow and red in color, is the actual executive order that came from the governor, and the second one, that's on the white sheet, is the actual state rule. So I want to highlight a couple of things and then answer any questions. Let me first start by saying, none of this, to be very honest, affects us because we follow state law. There is state law that makes it very clear instructionally what we can do, what we can count, and we have been following that. So I want to start there because I want to be very transparent about that because there's not probably much that is going to affect us at all from this perspective. So a couple things. You saw in the executive order, and I think just want to pull it out, is that it makes reference to where we are on a national average. Just overall for instructional time, we're 47th in the country. And then it talks a lot about just where we are in state testing. So again, that's something that just has been used as part of that conversation. So when I got here, I realized we needed more instructional time. So we do go above and beyond what the required amount is because part of that is true. When you have good instructional time for students, again, I came from a state that state law was 182 days. We only have to go by hours, and we've worked really hard because I believe for this year and next year, we're at 171 student instructional contact days overall. There are some districts that are in the 140s, 150s, 160s. When I got here, I believe we were 165. So we worked really hard with the unions to move in that direction because I think that's important. Because it is important. It is one of the factors for success. It's not the only factor because there's good instructional practices, students coming to school on a regular basis, right? So I want to be careful as central school district, like it's not just one thing that's going to continue for us to focus on. There are multiple metrics, including regular attendance, which we talk about pretty significantly that play into all of this. It's really clear in my mind as a superintendent, it was really clear what you can and can't count. I don't know if that's just not been happening in other school districts. I'm not going to talk through that, but we have really built our instructional time based on the way the laws are written. I think that's coming into question by the governor of school districts doing that. But I will show you in a couple documents that we have been tracking this since coming out of COVID because of some of the concerns that have come forth across the state in instructional time. So we have built things to make sure that we are meeting state laws and can show that back to 23-24 as an example. And I can go build it back further, but we really started doing that a couple of years ago. So we had documentation of that. So just so we're clear what instructional time now means by this executive order, it means that it's the total hours that students are in school bell to bell. That's not how it was calculated in the past. So when kids walk in the door, and I'm just going to use 8 as a starting point. If kids walk in the door at 8 and they leave at 2:30, or they come in at 8:15 and they leave at 3:20, that is the amount of time that we get to count. Now, we haven't built that yet because this just came last week. We're going to build you both what I'm going to show you today, what we currently have built from the old rule, and then we're going to build a new document to show you what now it looks like. But it's bell to bell, which includes recess, lunch, passing time, and the hours of instruction. Again, we built a document that pulled all of those out and just said, here's the straight number of minutes we do per day to make sure we could get to the hours that was the previous state rules for instruction. So we want to come back to you because that's part of my conversation with you all is really, I want to lens with this executive order and then sort of what we have done in the past. Do you want at the May meeting for us to do a presentation on here's what it was and now here's what it looks like? So at least we can show transparently to the community. We've always been doing this. We've always done the right thing. Central will always do the right thing from that perspective. If there are laws and rules, we abide by them. So I just want guidance from you all a little bit, based on that. The hours don't change, so that's a little bit of the nuance of, I still think there's some areas where we're getting clarity on, because there's still some hour context in it. In state law, an executive order is not state law, so those are contradicting a little bit. The state board passed some things, the governor asked to remove conferences, which, again, for a school district that has a strategic goal of family engagement and involvement, and where conferences are a couple times a year where you can get a face-to-face with a teacher and families, like, that's a huge thing. And we had a couple superintendents advocate for that, and the state board chose not to put that in the rules. Executive order asked for it, but the state board, in the way we do rules, did not approve that. So there could still be some legal things that come forward. I'm a little worried that this is not over. I'm just gonna say it that way, that this is just the beginning stages of some of those pieces.
I think a presentation at a board meeting would be a very good idea.
Okay,
Because this is the kind of thing that can be so categorically misunderstood.
Yeah.
I mean, it just, there's so many pieces to it. And I think for people to hear the difference between what a school day mean and what hours of instruction mean.
right,
And what that includes and what it doesn't include.
right. So take this white sheet as an example. So I want you to shift and move to this one. So I think it's really important here. So the first page in the bold is all the new rules. Okay, so this is really taken from the executive order. So you see, as an example, B is instructional time means the total hours for students in school, bell to bell, including recess, lunch, passive time, and instruction. And then it has, as of April 16th, districts may not do the following, which means reduced days, those types of things. If the board chooses not to follow that, because really that will have to come to the board now, and we have to publicly share out also why we're saying that we're cutting days and not following the executive order. So I think a lot of those moving parts, I just want to make you aware of. But I think a couple things, if you flip to page 2 and then just moving forward, these are still the rules from the State Board of Education. So a couple things that I just want you to note, because I don't always put this in front of you because we're meeting the law, and my job is to make sure we're doing things correctly as a superintendent with our leadership teams and you all. And so we've worked really hard in our calendars and how we do our calendars to get feedback. But there's a couple things I just want to point out that we've always done, but I think because this is going to come under light a little bit more, like I shared in the Friday report. So graduation, we're supposed to report to you of early grad rates, early graduation, those types of things. We don't get a ton of those. We get handfuls, and we can technically not report to you all anything under the N of 10. I think we get maybe 2 or 3 a year of those that go early. So we're never going to report that to the board, right? That doesn't meet the threshold of some of the things that are in here. So specifically for high school, as an example, we don't report to you because we don't have a ton of that. Do we have handfuls? Yes. We've got 2 or 3 that graduate early. Yes. Am I ever going to bring that to you? No, because it's identifiable and we want to protect kids. So those processes happen, but because they're so small, we would never report those to the board. I think the other thing that I want to make you aware of, it talked about instruction time to kindergarten, that if you're not doing 900 hours, which we are way over 900 hours, and I'll show you that in a second. It's really small print, but at least I'll show it to you. And then we're going to check our numbers because we just want to make sure everything's correct. But we do what's called a kinder soft start. Again, this goes back to where our strategic goals are focused on student growth and achievement and family engagement and involvement. What we do with, and Julie, please correct me if I'm wrong on any of this as I talk, because I know you are help support that. So in the Kinder Jumpstart, what we do is we do modified days in smaller groups. So we have sort of like this A-B schedule. So group A will come Monday, Tuesday, group B will come Wednesday, Thursday, and then possibly Friday, again, I'm making this up, we would have more parent conference time.
Mhm.
So getting to know the parents, getting to know tell us about the strengths of your kindergartner. Tell us what things maybe you struggle with at home with your kindergartner. So we work really hard in a 3-week period to really get to learn our kindergartners. We are a daycare desert out here. So a lot of our kids, kindergarten is the first, outside of probably doing play groups, the first time that they are in a setting with multiple other students, as an example. So we value that. That is great partnership with families to really get that authentic of like, hey, we want to get to know your kid and make sure we're jumping off on the right foot with your kindergartner. So we're gonna go back and check those numbers. I believe we're fine, but I think it's important for you all, when they say things, when the executive order says things like cutting conferences or not allowing us to have some flexibility, I don't think they realize the importance of some of the reason we do the flexibility is relationships with parents. Professional development is an important aspect that we are trying to engage in, right? Our principals are trying to do it. We need more professional development time. Right now, I can't get that because of the way this rule is written. But I think that's one of the things we were going to look at coming forward, potentially with some changes, is how do we get more professional learning time? So there's just a lot of moving parts to this that I just want to make you aware of as we continue to work through them. What I am going to show you, and then what we're going to do is we'll modify this when we come to the board meeting. I'm going to show you the spreadsheet that we've built, just so you can see. It's really small, so I apologize for that, but I'm just going to walk you through it. You want it? You can say I can do it. You want it?
Thanks.
Because I think it's really important, and I will give credit. This started at the high school. Those of you that know Jill, she's one of our gurus when it comes to spreadsheets, and she's a big part of our reporting to the Oregon Department of Ed. So this is last year's counts. Usually this time of year is when we start to put these together, because I just want to verify if we had snow days, those types of things. So let me just walk you through. If you can just look at the Central High School, which is the first page, I'll just sort of walk you through it. So we have up at the top professional development days and Wednesday PLC time. Wednesday PLC time is considered professional time. So we just calculate how much PD that we do, because we can only use a certain amount. If you look at that top, if you go all the way to the far right where it says total required and difference, which is in blue, you see that? There's a little small column that says actual right before that blue column. So we calculate what our total PD hours are, but we can only count a certain amount. So we have done a really good job of trying to back things out that we cannot. And then you'll see, if you go back to the left side, you'll see where conferences are, we back that out. Then we talk about what's our full school days, how many of those are, how many minutes is that? How many Wednesdays do we have? Because Wednesdays time's different. We have non-instructional time, so passing periods. We put in here, hey, they do PEP assemblies every once in a while, so we do an average of that. So I think it's really, I just want to be clear with you all and the community. We have been doing this and we will continue to do this. And we'll look at the new rules, but we have been following this ever since. So this does not affect us that much, but I just wanted to put this in front of you because this, or a version of this, is what we will present to you all at the board meeting when we have it on in May. So if you flip to the next page, that's Talmadge, and then the last page, as an example, is elementary, which have less things than the middle school and the high school, as an example. You can see where yellow is. So last year we had 2 snow days. We made those up, right? So we calculate anything like that plays into that. So I just wanted to give you all an example of like, we're doing this. Again, questions from you all from seeing this, or anything else that you want us to make sure we present at the, Brian, you want to add anything?
While it doesn't impact us in that way, what it does do is lock us into the number of days that we have. Which seems almost contradictory, but it's not, because we're over the number of hours of instruction. How we deliver those hours of instruction now is locked in the number of days that we currently have.
Right.
Could we go with fewer days and still get those hours met? Yes. But because the law has changed, that can't change. And that's the part where there's a lot of inequity with this across the, not inequities, it's like not equal across all of the districts, is that it just so happens what you have in 24-25. It doesn't, there's no standard. And the standard is, what did you have personally as a district? Not personally, you as a district, what did you have in 24-25? And that's where this becomes a very odd approach to this, and it does impact us, because we're not gonna be on the same footing as every other district. Because each district is kind of on their own kind of schedule, look at this. That's the only thing I would add.
Yeah, and
So the minimum is what you say it is.
The minimum is what
Or your
what-
baseline is.
was your baseline is what you made it back in 24 and 25, without realizing that was a baseline that you were
Yeah.
creating.
No.
and at that
And
point,
if you made changes after 24-25, you now are going to be held accountable. We're not going to be, but other districts will be held accountable for any changes they made this school year, even though the law was being followed by them. So it's a really strange thing, because you're not being held harmless anyway. You're saying we changed the law, and retroactively, we're gonna go back and penalize you for what you did when under the previous law. It doesn't make sense. So I think there's gonna be a lot of argument.
now, I think this is, what I would tell you is, I think this will be clearly, this is setting the stage for, in the long session, some sort of legislation coming forward about what instructional time will look like.
And the unions are gonna have something to say about it too, I would assume. Oh, yeah.
They should. I want to be really clear about this. We work very hard with both of our unions when we do the calendar. We're trying to get the most instructional time, but then also trying to figure out, when can we do PD? We're gonna protect PLC time, right? All of those pieces. We know that we need a little bit more PD time. We've been trying to figure that out. Now I don't even have the flexibility, even though I'm meeting the guidance of the state
Exceeding
and exceeding it.
140 hours almost more. at
And the
college
elementary,
than required.
and the elementaries, high school, we're close, but we were trying to, because we're in negotiations, and not that I'm negotiating, but there's conversations that were gonna take place about this. Now that takes it away from us. So that we're doing the right work, and we need to make a little bit of a shift in support of our staff who supports kids, so we can improve our instruction, because I want to be really clear what the governor says. When she says, instructional time when paired with effective teaching practices. If we can't do PD to help our staff continue to be effective practices, this doesn't help. So her trying to remove PD days or give us less flexibility for what we need to do, they should be upset. Because if you're doing the right work and your unions are working with you to do the right things, which ours tend to do, now we're hand tied. And so now we've got to figure out, okay, what do we have in our current schedule until we get more guidance? Is this the last guidance I think we will get? No. Do I think will it probably not change until long session? Probably. So we're stuck probably for a year with what we have and what we have proposed to you all. And even some of that, we may have to go look and make sure that based on this new rule, we haven't missed anything. So we're gonna continue to work with the unions. Again, we have meet and confer with one tomorrow. This is one of our topics. We'll continue to, if we need to pull them together collectively, we'll do that. But like I said, I want to be very upfront with you all. We have done the right work. We will continue to do the right work. I think just hand ties us a little bit in some of the flexibilities and what, again, trying to embrace together instructional time paired with effective teaching practices. That's hand tied a little bit now because of the way this is written. So hopefully we'll get some flexibility and maybe some guidance as we finish the school year. If there's some conversations that can happen, if the state school board still meets, May, April, June, July, I believe. So there's some time that potentially we could advocate, and I think that'll be a larger conversation across the state of what that would look like, moving forward. So other questions for us?
What does that mean for? I mean, these are just what ifs. There's a million what ifs here. What does it mean for snow days that get pushed? You have too many snow days.
There's snow days are in
There,
here.
there's we
12
would
hours.
have to bring it back, right?
It's
So,
just-
so we built in 3 days.
Right. But
And
I guess my point is if you have more than.
Yeah.
And it's not just snow days, it's broken air conditioner
Yep.
days.
It,
We're having to follow.
Internet
all-
down
internet down
days.
days.
well, and I'll give you an example. One of my greatest concerns is, let's say we were to have some, let's just go to June real quickly. So we're getting close to the end of the school year. We get 5 days of 95-degree weather. We're not, I want to be clear, we can't keep kids in the building. We're gonna probably go to school till 1:30, just like we did at the beginning. We were close at the beginning of the school year, if you remember. We're in those high 90s. We have 3 schools that do not have any type of air conditioning, and if we can't get a low the night before, those buildings do not cool off. Our question is, so if I have to do that in June, do I have to make up those 2 hours? Because I'm already meeting the instructional minutes.
Mhm.
So that's some of the stuff that I gotta get clarity on from now till the end of the school year, because we need it, and we shouldn't have to. I mean this, by the way, that the state board and the rules are, I don't think we should have to make it up. We meet the criteria. But because of some of the legislation, because of some of the language in the executive order, I'm just not clear.
What would possess her to do days?
so, yeah, and because snow days, some of our makeup snow days are without kids. The executive order is days, kids in front of teachers. So we make staff pick up some days, but we may not have made kids make them up in the past because they had enough hours.
Yeah.
But now we would have to make up the snow days with students. So where you put them on the schedule matters.
So we'll present, hopefully we'll have a little bit more information from 2 weeks from now. We may not, I want to be really clear about that. But we'll try and do this in a succinct way in a PowerPoint to just sort of show, here's what we have been doing, we meet the rule, and here's what now the rule is, and you can see how many more hours we do have. If you have any questions about this, do not hesitate to email me or call me, because we want to try and get things answered. But again, I think just today is just more about we're doing the right things. And I want to say that to thanking the community and working with us. Thank you, because a lot of that came when we built a strategic plan. That's working with both our union leadership, our leadership tied to instructional practices, and what we're trying to do across this district. Okay,
But for a district.
yeah, I would like, yes, I'm gonna take these back. We will give you, we wanna check numbers. We have not had time to do any of that. We've just been mostly putting, talking points together and those types of things. So if you can leave these, then we will present and then put it on the website and on the agenda, the actual, what we have done. As we move
You
forward.
want the.
You can keep those. No, you all can keep the executive order and
Okay, you just want the
Yeah.
spreadsheet.
These were attached to the Friday. report, though,
yes,
too.
they were also, but if you do want a hard copy of it.
Thanks.
Okay, with that, Byron, when you are ready to quickly put us into recess into executive session.
Well, move into executive session,
All right,
back into regular PLC. Is there any discussion or any other business that needs to be brought? No discussion or no objections, we will end the meeting. Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.